Kayla grabbed her wrist before she could leave. "Alyssa," she said, her voice firm. "Talk to me. Don't you feel the same?" She placed her hand on her chest. Alyssa froze, her pulse racing under Kayla's touch. The story, Lesbians' Adventure, Chapter 1, New Beginnings. The bus screeched to a halt in front of Brookhaven Academy, its towering gates casting long shadows across the courtyard. Alyssa Monroe stepped off, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. Her gaze swept over the ornate brick buildings, their ivy-covered walls stretching high into the sky. She tugged at the strap of her duffel bag, her heart racing. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her mother had said, a chance to leave behind the noise of Atlanta and find herself. Inside the administration office, the headmistress handed her a key and a schedule with a stern look. "Room 3C, she said, her tone curt. "You'll be sharing with Kayla Simmons." The walk to her room was a maze of long hallways and quiet whispers from passing students. When Alyssa finally found 3C, she hesitated, staring at the door. Taking a deep breath, she turned the handle. Inside, the room was neat and spacious, with 2 twin beds and a large window overlooking the grounds. A girl was sitting cross-legged on one of the beds, her head bent over a book. She looked up as Alyssa entered, and their eyes met. Kayla Simmons was striking. Her skin was a deep, rich brown, her hair styled in perfect box braids that cascaded over her shoulders. She studied Alyssa for a moment, her dark eyes unreadable, before offering a curt nod. "You must be the new girl," Kayla said, closing her book. Her voice was smooth but guarded. "Alyssa," she introduced herself, setting her duffel bag down. Kayla leaned back on her bed, watching Alyssa unpack with a casual intensity that made Alyssa pause. "Where are you from?" "Atlanta," Alyssa replied, glancing at her over her shoulder. "You?" Kayla hesitated. "Here and there," she said vaguely, her lips curling into a slight smile. Throughout the evening, Alyssa felt Kayla's eyes on her, silent, observant, and strangely unnerving. The girl had a quiet confidence, but there was something about Alyssa that seemed to hold her attention. Later that night, as Alyssa lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She turned her head, and there it was. Kayla's eyes, glinting softly in the moonlight, fixed on her. Alyssa's voice broke the silence, soft but firm. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Kayla didn't answer, just smiled, a flicker of something unspoken lingering in her gaze. The next morning, Alyssa followed the flow of students to the dining hall. The place buzzed with chatter and laughter, but Alyssa felt the weight of curious stares as she carried her tray of food. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on Kayla, who was sitting alone by the window. Alyssa hesitated before walking over. "Mind if I sit here?" Kayla glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Go ahead." As they ate in silence, Alyssa couldn't help but notice the way Kayla seemed different around her. She wasn't the aloof girl from the previous night. Instead, she looked almost shy, stealing glances at Alyssa when she thought she wasn't looking. "So, is everyone here this intense?" Alyssa asked, breaking the silence. Kayla smirked, her fingers playing with the edge of her tray. "They're not used to someone like you." Alyssa raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me?" Kayla's smirk faltered, and she looked away. "You just stand out," she said, her voice quieter now. The day passed in a blur of introductions and new classes, but Alyssa couldn't shake the feeling of Kayla's lingering presence. It wasn't just the stolen glances or the way Kayla seemed to be everywhere she turned. It was the way her heart raced whenever their eyes met. That evening, Alyssa decided to explore the campus grounds. The air was crisp, the stars bright against the dark sky. She found herself near the old oak tree by the courtyard, its sprawling branches casting eerie shadows. "Couldn't sleep?" Kayla's voice came from behind her. Alyssa spun around, startled. Kayla was standing there, her hands shoved into the pockets of her hoodie. "Just wanted some air," Alyssa said. Kayla stepped closer, her gaze locked on Alyssa's. "You're different," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what it is about you, but… She trailed off, biting her lip. Alyssa felt her cheeks heat under Kayla's intense stare. Kayla, are you okay? Kayla's breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked like she might say something. But then she shook her head, stepping back. Forget it, she muttered, turning away. The next evening, Alyssa sat on her bed, her fingers brushing over the red ribbon still tied around her wrist. She had meant to take it off, but somehow couldn't bring herself to. It felt significant, like an unspoken message from Kayla she wasn't ready to let go of. Across the room, Kayla lay sprawled on her bed, a book balanced on her stomach. Her braids shimmered in the moonlight filtering through the window, and Alyssa couldn't help but notice how peaceful she looked. "What's on your mind?" Kayla asked suddenly, her voice pulling Alyssa from her thoughts. Alyssa blinked, startled. "What?" Kayla smirked, sitting up and resting her elbows on her knees. "You've been staring at me for at least 5 minutes. What are you thinking about?" Heat rushed to Alyssa's cheeks. "I wasn't staring. I was… thinking." "About?" Kayla prompted, leaning forward slightly. Alyssa hesitated, then decided to deflect. "Why did you pick a girls' school?" she asked, genuinely curious. Kayla chuckled softly, running a hand over her braids. "What makes you think I picked it?" "I don't know. You don't seem like the type to just go along with something unless you wanted to." Kayla tilted her head, her smirk softening into something more thoughtful. "You're right. It was my choice. I wanted a place where I could focus on myself, figure out who I am without all the noise." Alyssa nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "That makes sense. For me, my mom wanted me here. She thinks the environment is structured, or something like that." Kayla raised an eyebrow. "And you just went along with it?" "Not really," Alyssa admitted with a grin. "I'm also running away from boys. They're exhausting." Kayla laughed, a warm, melodic sound that made Alyssa's chest tighten in a way she didn't fully understand. "I can relate to that," Kayla said, her eyes glinting with amusement. "What about you?" Alyssa asked, leaning back on her hands. "Why a girls' school?" Kayla's gaze lingered on her for a moment before she answered. "Because I think girls are beautiful, strong, worth understanding." The sincerity in her voice caught Alyssa off guard. She didn't know how to respond, so she settled for a soft, "I get that." They fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of Kayla's words lingering between them like an unspoken promise. The following morning, Alyssa woke to the sound of rustling. Kayla was by the window, staring out at the courtyard. Her posture was relaxed, but something about her expression made Alyssa pause. "You're up early," Alyssa said, sitting up and stretching. Kayla glanced back at her, a small smile playing on her lips. "Couldn't sleep." Alyssa slid out of bed, tying her robe around her waist. "Do you always wake up before the sun, or is this a special occasion?" Kayla laughed softly, shaking her head. "Let's just say I'm a light sleeper." As Alyssa grabbed her toiletries, she hesitated, then turned to Kayla. "Hey, do you ever feel like this place is too… perfect?" Kayla raised an eyebrow. "Too perfect?" "Yeah," Alyssa said, frowning. "Like, everyone's so polished and proper, it's kind of intimidating." Kayla shrugged, leaning against the window frame. "Maybe. But I think you're different." Alyssa blinked. "Different how?" Kayla's smile deepened, her gaze warm and unguarded for once. "You're refreshing. You don't try to fit in, you're just… you." Alyssa felt her cheeks heat under Kayla's scrutiny. She busied herself by grabbing her towel. "Thanks, I guess." As they headed to breakfast, Alyssa decided to turn the tables. "So, what's the real reason you chose Brookhaven, besides the whole figuring yourself out thing?" Kayla smirked. "You're persistent, aren't you?" "Curious," Alyssa corrected, grinning. Kayla's eyes glinted with amusement. "Fine, I'll tell you, but only if you tell me something about you in return." "Deal," Alyssa said, intrigued. Kayla stopped walking, turning to face her. "I chose Brookhaven because I wanted to be somewhere where I didn't have to explain myself, where I could just… be." Alyssa nodded, understanding more than she let on. Fair enough? My turn, Kayla said, crossing her arms. Why did you really agree to come here? Alyssa hesitated, then sighed. Honestly, I wanted a fresh start. Atlanta was messy. Too many distractions. Kayla nodded, her expression softening. I get that. They continued walking, their conversation light and easy, but Alyssa couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed an invisible line with Kayla, one that brought them closer together. Cliffhanger. As they entered the dining hall, Kayla leaned closer and whispered, You know, you're even more interesting than I thought.